They called her the one-eyed heiress of Belcourt, and half the county came to St. Wilfrid's Church that morning not to bless a marriage, but to watch a desperate lord collect a fortune nobody expected him to touch. None of them knew that before the wedding feast was cleared away, the groom would understand that his bride saw more with one eye than most men saw with two, and that what she noticed that night would unravel a plot 12 years in the making. St. Wilfrid's had never held so many guests who came only to stare. Every pew was filled with velvet and quiet cruelty, and not one soul among them had come to wish Charlotte Ainsworth well. They had come to see the spectacle Belcourt had whispered about for weeks, the marriage of a ruined viscount to the girl the newspapers had taken to calling poor Lord Ainsworth's damaged treasure. Charlotte stood near the vestry door, 24 years old, a fine black silk patch covering her left eye, the skin around it faintly marked by an old injury that had never been explained to the county's satisfaction. She had heard every name they gave her over the years: the broken heiress, the half-blind bride, the girl fortune forgot to finish ruining. She walked toward the altar with her chin level, her good eye moving calmly over the crowd, because she had long ago decided that whatever they whispered, she would not give them the satisfaction of watching her look away first. At the altar stood a man the papers had already begun to pity for entirely different reasons. Thomas Price, newly inherited Viscount Ferrers, tall, quiet, his composure the practiced calm of a man who had made his decision before doubt could catch him. He did not flinch when she reached him. He did not offer the false warmth of a man performing kindness for an audience. He simply watched her come the way a soldier watches weather he has already decided to march through. The whispers followed her up the aisle like smoke. He must be desperate indeed to marry a girl who can only see half of what stands before her. Someone laughed behind a gloved hand. Thomas heard every word. His expression did not change. When Charlotte reached him, he stepped forward before the clergyman gave his signal and offered her his arm in front of the entire church. A small thing, but the first courtesy either of them had received there that morning. 3 weeks before the wedding, Thomas Price had stood in what remained of his family's shipping fortune and tried to remember what it felt like to make a decision that was not born of desperation. The Price family had once controlled 4 trading vessels and half the warehouse district along the eastern docks. Now 2 ships were lost to creditors, the third sat idle for want of repair, and the family name had been dragged through every financial column in London since his late father's business partner had vanished with the company's reserves, leaving Thomas, at 29, responsible for his mother's care and his younger sister's entire future. He had learned very quickly that a title without capital behind it commanded no more respect than an empty warehouse with a fine sign above the door. So when Lord Reginald Ainsworth's letter arrived requesting a private meeting, Thomas had gone, because pride, he had discovered, was the first luxury a desperate man surrendered. Reginald received him in a study crowded with maritime charts and old family portraits, a broad, red-faced man whose hearty manner never quite reached his eyes. "I understand your family's difficulties," he said without preamble. "I am prepared to resolve them entirely. My niece and ward, Charlotte, requires a husband before her 25th birthday, per the terms of her late father's will. In exchange for your name and a single ceremony, I will clear every debt against the Price shipping concern, restock your fleet, and see your sister properly settled with a dowry befitting a duke's daughter. All of it, Thomas, for a wedding ring and a bit of patience with a girl London finds unfortunate to look at." Thomas had heard the rumors about Charlotte Ainsworth the way every gentleman in London had heard them. Pitying, exaggerated, whispered at card tables as a curiosity. He asked to meet her before he answered, because whatever else he was, he refused to marry a stranger and then flinch at her in public like a coward. Reginald arranged it with visible reluctance. Charlotte received him standing in the long gallery of Belcourt House, her back to a row of windows so that the afternoon light fell fully upon her rather than behind her, as if she wished to be seen clearly rather than softened by shadow. "You may look your fill, my lord," she said before he could speak. "I am told it eases the disappointment later if one gets the shock over with early." "I am not disappointed, Miss Ainsworth. No, only obligated." Her voice was dry, entirely without self-pity. My uncle tells me you require rescuing rather urgently. I am told I require a husband rather urgently. It seems for once our two urgencies might actually suit each other. Thomas found, unexpectedly, that he did not want to lie to her. I will not pretend affection I do not yet feel. I would be a fool to insult you with that lie. But I will not insult you with performed pity either. You are not the curiosity the papers describe. What am I then? Someone I have not yet had the chance to know properly. It was not romantic. It was not even especially warm. But it was honest, and Charlotte had received so little honesty in her life since her father's death that it landed harder than any flattery could have. She accepted the marriage for reasons of her own, reasons she confided to no one, least of all Thomas. Her father's will had stipulated that upon her marriage she would gain immediate control of Larkspur House, the small coastal estate her mother had left her, along with a modest independent income her uncle had managed as her guardian for the past 9 years. 9 years of being watched, managed, and quietly excluded from her own affairs had taught Charlotte to want nothing so much as a set of accounts she could finally examine with her own eye, undisturbed. What she did not know, what neither of them yet understood, was precisely how much her uncle needed that marriage to happen exactly as he had arranged it, and precisely how little he intended for her to ever reach Larkspur House at all. Charlotte's father, Sir Edmund Ainsworth, had died 9 years before in what the county surgeon ruled an accident at sea, thrown from the deck of his own vessel during a storm off the eastern coast. Charlotte, 12 at the time and aboard the same ship, had suffered the injury to her eye during the same storm, struck by a length of rigging that came loose in the chaos, or so she had always been told. She had never fully trusted that account. She remembered fragments the physicians dismissed as trauma-induced confusion. A raised voice below decks before the storm properly broke. Her father's expression when he came up on deck. Not frightened of the weather, but of something or someone closer at hand. Sir Edmund had left behind a fortune separate from the Ainsworth family estate. Shipping shares, a modest trust, and Larkspur House itself, all held for Charlotte under her uncle's guardianship until her marriage or her 25th birthday, whichever came first. Reginald had spent 9 careful years drawing from that trust to prop up his own failing investments in the very shipping concerns that had once made the Ainsworth name respected. Once Charlotte married, an independent accounting of that trust would become nearly impossible to avoid, and the theft, buried for nearly a decade, would surface at last. With his solicitor, a soft-spoken man named Cornelius Ray, Reginald had constructed something considerably darker than a simple arranged marriage. Enough of the trust would be released to make the union appear legitimate. Thomas, desperate and newly married to a wealthy woman, would make a convenient suspect should anything unfortunate befall his bride in the months that followed. An accident, perhaps, much like the one that had claimed her father. In the carriage after the ceremony, Charlotte sat with her spine straight, her gloved hands folded over her bouquet long after there was any reason to hold it, her good eye occasionally studying the passing countryside with a stillness that seemed to take in far more than idle scenery required. Thomas, who had spent the ceremony reading every small hesitation in his new wife's posture, understood that something beneath her composure was deeply wrong, though he could not yet name what. "You need not perform ease for my benefit," he said quietly, using her new title for the first time. "I have already seen you as you are. There is no one left in this carriage to convince." "There is always someone to convince," Charlotte said, "even when it is only myself." He did not press her further. He had learned enough in one brief conversation weeks before to understand that pressing Charlotte only closed doors that patients might eventually open on their own. Neither of them yet knew that by the time the candles at Ferrers' house burned low that night, the true danger circling this marriage would have nothing to do with a missing eye the world had mocked her for, and everything to do with what her uncle had done to her father 9 years before, aboard a ship in a storm no one had ever properly questioned. At Ferrers' house, the staff had prepared the traditional wedding night arrangements. A lady's maid to assist the new Viscountess, warmed water, a fire built high against the evening chill. Charlotte dismissed the maid at the bedchamber door with a quiet firmness that left the girl uncertain whether to obey. "I prefer to manage alone tonight," she said. Thomas, standing in the corridor, heard the exchange, and something in his chest tightened that he could not yet explain. He waited nearly an hour, giving Charlotte the solitude she seemed to need, before he knocked, careful and unhurried. "Charlotte, I only wish to know that you are well. I am not asking to enter uninvited." A pause stretched long enough that he nearly turned away. Then her voice came, steadier than he expected. "You may come in." What Thomas found when he stepped inside was not what he had braced himself for. Charlotte stood near the window rather than the fire, the black silk patch removed and resting on the dressing table beside her, the scarring around her eye visible in full for the first time. Old, healed, more extensive than the patch had ever suggested, the eye itself clouded and sightless beneath a faintly lowered lid. She did not turn away from him. "You may look properly, if you wish," she said. "I find I no longer have patience for hiding it from you specifically. There seems little point, given what we are to each other now." He crossed the room slowly, taking a seat near the window rather than looming over her. "May I ask what happened?" "A storm, 9 years ago, aboard my father's ship, the night he died." Her voice remained level, though her hand drifted briefly to the scarring near her temple. "Everyone believes the rigging struck me by accident during the chaos, and that my father was thrown overboard by the same storm. I have never fully believed either explanation, though I was only 12, and no physician since has taken my memory of that night seriously. I remember a voice below decks before the worst of the weather arrived. I remember my father's face when he came above deck. Not the fear of a man facing a storm, but the fear of a man who has just discovered something he cannot undo." Thomas thought of his own father's vanished business partner, of debts that had never been properly explained, and something cold settled behind his ribs. "I believe you," he said simply. Charlotte studied him for a long moment, searching, as she always did now, for the flicker of pity or performance that would tell her this kindness was theater. She found instead a steadiness she had rarely been offered. A man sitting quietly by a window, asking nothing of her beyond the truth she chose to share. "There is something I want to show you," she said finally, "though I have shown it to no one since it happened." She retrieved a small leather case from her trunk, and from it drew a single item, a brass compass, its glass face cracked, its needle frozen permanently at a bearing that meant nothing to Thomas at first glance. "This belonged to my father. It was recovered from the deck the morning after the storm, in a place it should never have been resting, near the stern rather than the helm where he was meant to stand that night. I kept it because no one else thought it significant. I have spent 9 years wondering why my father's compass was found nowhere near where a man lost overboard during a storm ought to have been standing." Thomas turned the compass over slowly, then looked at her properly, genuinely without words for the first time since the ceremony that morning. Not from the tragedy of the story itself, but from the quiet, exacting patience it represented. A woman who had spent 9 years alone, working methodically toward a truth no physician or magistrate had ever taken seriously. Armed with nothing but a broken compass and an attention to detail the world had persistently underestimated in her, in no small part because of the eye she had lost that same night. "You believe your father did not fall," Thomas said slowly. "You believe he was somewhere he should not have been, for a reason someone else arranged. I believe my uncle has spent 9 years ensuring no one asks that question properly." Charlotte met his eyes without flinching. "And I believe that now that I am married, and Larkspur House and my father's trust pass out of his management by law, he has very little time left to keep it quiet." The following weeks built a fragile, purposeful closeness between them. They took to reviewing her father's old shipping ledgers together in the evenings, and Thomas discovered, with genuine admiration, that Charlotte's understanding of maritime accounts and trade routes exceeded that of most clerks he had employed. Knowledge she had built for herself in the long hours her uncle believed her occupied with needlework and rest. There were smaller moments, too. Thomas noticed that Charlotte always positioned herself with her blind side toward a wall rather than an open room, and without comment began arranging their seating at dinner and in the study so that her good eye faced whoever entered, sparing her the discomfort of constantly repositioning herself. When a visiting tailor spoke of Charlotte's appearance as though she could not hear him, suggesting a heavier veil to disguise the unfortunate eye, Thomas dismissed the man before Charlotte had to speak a word in her own defense. She was furious at being handled rather than consulted, and he apologized without excuse, letting her select her own modiste after, a woman who fitted gowns and headpieces to the face Charlotte actually had. It was into this careful, unfinished piece that danger arrived. Charlotte's lady's maid, a steady young woman named Effie, had taken to tasting her mistress's evening chocolate before serving it, an old habit rooted in instinct rather than specific suspicion. One evening she drank from a cup meant for Charlotte and collapsed within the hour, her breathing shallow, her skin cold. Thomas did not wait for the household physician, a man with long-standing ties to Belcourt. He rode through the night to fetch an independent doctor from the neighboring parish. Effie survived, though it took 2 anxious days before her fever finally broke. Charlotte sat beside the girl's bed through both nights, her hands never still. "It was meant for me," she said quietly on the second evening, when Thomas brought tea she did not touch. "Someone in this house still answers to my uncle. Ferrer's house was never truly beyond his reach. It was only ever another version of the house I grew up watched inside." "Then we stop waiting for your uncle's permission to be safe," Thomas said, and something in his voice had shifted entirely from the careful courtesy of their wedding day. "We stop waiting, and we prove what you have known since you were 12 years old." That night, with Effie finally sleeping peacefully, Charlotte led Thomas to the small study that had belonged to his own late father, a room untouched since the scandal that had driven the elder Price to an early grave, still crowded with unopened correspondence no one had thought worth examining. Because if her uncle had spent 9 years silencing a truth about a storm, Eleanor reasoned there might be some trace left behind by the very man who had once done business with Reginald Ainsworth, and who had vanished with a fortune of his own the same year Charlotte's father died. What they found inside would carry them from a broken compass discovered in the wrong place on a ship's deck, all the way to a conspiracy that had already claimed one life at sea, and had very nearly claimed a second 9 years before anyone thought to ask the right question of the one witness everyone had assumed could not have seen anything at all. The correspondence in the elder Price's old study took 3 nights to fully piece together. Hidden inside routine shipping manifests exchanged between Thomas's father and a man named Cornelius Ray, the very solicitor who now served Reginald Ainsworth. The elder Price, it turned out, had once uncovered irregularities in a joint shipping venture years before his own business partner vanished with company reserves, and had written to Ray demanding an explanation. The replies grew steadily colder. Within months, the elder Price's own reputation had been quietly undermined through rumor and forged debts, and he had died believing himself simply the victim of poor fortune at sea. "My father was silenced," Thomas said, his voice flat with barely contained fury, "because he asked precisely the question you have been asking for 9 years. Charlotte did not misread his anger this time. She took his hand instead. "Then we are not uncovering 2 separate wrongs, Thomas. We are uncovering one, conducted by the same hand twice." Working late into successive nights, they traced the full pattern. Reginald Ainsworth had been drawing from Charlotte's father's trust for years before the fatal storm, funneling funds into failing shipping ventures he could never openly explain to his brother. Sir Edmund had discovered the theft roughly a year before his death, and had begun quietly gathering proof of his own, evidence that, made public, would have stripped Reginald of both his fortune and his freedom. The compass, Charlotte realized upon closer study of her father's old shipping charts, marked the exact bearing of a sternside cargo hatch rarely used by the crew. A place a man overseeing routine navigation would never have reason to stand, but a place a man meeting someone in secret, away from the watch, most certainly would. Confirmation arrived from an unexpected source. Effie, recovering slowly, revealed that her own uncle had once served as a deckhand aboard Sir Edmund's vessel and had left the sea suddenly the same year, paid an unusually generous sum to relocate his family, and never discussed the voyage again. Thomas found the man within days, now an elderly harbour master, 2 counties north, and he agreed at last to give a written account of what he had witnessed that night. Reginald Ainsworth boarding the vessel quietly before the storm broke, arguing bitterly with his brother near the stern, and departing in a small boat moments before Sir Edmund was ever reported missing. Sensing the ground shifting beneath him, Reginald did not wait to see how far the investigation would reach. He arranged for a private threat to be delivered to Thomas directly. Full restoration of the Price shipping fleet, every debt cleared, his sister's future secured, in exchange for the return of every document Charlotte had gathered, and her quiet removal to a private residence in the country, far from anyone who might listen to her properly. Thomas refused the offer in writing, before witnesses, though it cost him the very bargain that had first brought him to the altar. Charlotte would not learn of that refusal until later, and when she did, it meant more to her than any declaration spoken aloud ever could. The formal inquiry convened at the Admiralty Court on a grey autumn morning, attended by solicitors, trustees, and members of both the Ainsworth and Price families, called ostensibly to settle a dispute over the shipping trust, but understood by everyone present to be something far larger. Reginald had expected a quiet settlement among gentlemen behind closed doors. He had not expected his niece to arrive on her husband's arm, the silk patch removed entirely, her scarred and clouded eye visible for the first time in 9 years, without the slightest attempt to disguise what that storm had taken from her. Whispers moved through the hall the moment she entered, the same whispers that had once followed her up the aisle of St. Wilfrid's. This time, Charlotte did not lower her head. She presented the compass first, laid out with the same exacting precision she had once used to correct her father's old shipping ledgers. She presented the harbour master's written testimony. She presented the correspondence between Reginald's solicitor and Thomas's late father, proof that the elder Price's ruin had been engineered to silence a man who asked too many questions about a missing fortune. She presented the trust's financial records, showing 9 years of unexplained withdrawals Reginald had never been able to account for. Reginald, cornered at last by evidence he could no longer discredit, lost the composure that had carried him through 9 years of careful lies. "Had Edmund simply agreed to my terms on that ship," he said, his voice rising for the first time anyone in that hall had heard it rise, "none of this would ever have been necessary." The room went utterly silent at the admission buried inside his own fury. Pressed further by the magistrate, Reginald revealed in a moment of broken pride he would spend the remainder of his life regretting that he had confronted his brother that night intending only to negotiate, and that Edmund's fall from the deck during their argument, storm or no storm, had not been the accident he had spent 9 years insisting it was. Thomas did not speak over his wife throughout the proceeding. He intervened only once, submitting his own written refusal of Reginald's final bargain as evidence, proof that he had surrendered an entire fortune rather than betray the woman standing beside him. "My wife," he told the inquiry when at last he was asked to speak, "and my equal in every part of this matter, including the part society believed her too diminished to notice." The magistrates ordered Reginald Ainsworth held for trial on charges connected to his brother's death and years of financial fraud, charges that would end in the months that followed in his conviction and the total loss of everything he had spent 9 years protecting. Cornelius Ray faced his own prosecution for forgery and conspiracy. The elder Price's name was formally cleared, though the inquiry acknowledged that the scandal had cost the Price family years and opportunities it would never fully recover. Charlotte received full legal control of Larkspur House and her father's entire fortune. The Price shipping fleet was restored not through Reginald's broken promises, but through the plain judgment of the Admiralty Court, earned rather than purchased. In the quiet that followed, Thomas told Charlotte plainly that the circumstances of their marriage had been built on desperation from the very beginning, and that he would understand and would not contest it if she wished an annulment now that she was free to choose anything at all. "Do you want your freedom?" Charlotte asked him. "No," Thomas said, "but your choice must matter more than what I want. It always should have." Charlotte chose him. They exchanged new vows privately at Larkspur House the following spring, on the very stretch of coastline where her father's ship had once anchored, with no uncle presiding, no county watching, and no fortune-changing hands to explain why either of them had stayed. Society did not become suddenly kind in the months that followed. Some still stared when Charlotte entered a room without her patch, her clouded eye visible and unapologetic. The difference now was that she no longer treated their stares as a verdict on what she was capable of seeing. She had spent 9 years being told her missing eye meant she understood the world only by half. She had finally proven, in front of an entire Admiralty court, that she had been seeing more clearly than any of them all along. If Charlotte and Thomas's story moved something in you tonight, then you already understand why we tell these tales. If you enjoyed this journey through storms, silence, and a truth finally spoken aloud after 9 long years, please like this video, subscribe if you have not already, and tell us in the comments which moment struck you hardest: the broken compass, the harbor master's testimony, or the vows spoken with no uncle watching. We have another bride, another secret, and another woman the world underestimated waiting for you very soon. Thank you for spending this hour with us, and we will see you at the next fireside.